Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to RUBI's December briefing. We're really glad you could join us. Um, my name is Erica Edelson. I'm a co-founder of the Rural Urban Bridge Initiative, and I'm going to introduce our speaker today, Arlie Hochschild. Arlie is an emeritus professor of sociology at UC Berkeley, and she has written a lot of books, but probably the one that's most familiar to people here today is Strangers in Their Own Land, which came out right around the time that Trump was elected for the first time. And for that book, she spent years getting to know um, Tea Party Republicans in Louisiana. And she really showed how the Tea Party was kind of a prequel to MAGA. And now here we are 8 years later, and it's deja vu all over again with Trump being reelected. And Arlie is now out with a new book called Stolen Pride. And for this book, she really got to know white men in rural Kentucky. And what is great about this book is that what she does is something that's in pretty short supply these days, which is that she really approaches the people and the subject matter with a huge amount of empathy. And even when she hears things that she strongly disagrees with, she's really able to just set that judgment aside and listen and understand where people are coming from, and then turn that around and share that with all of us. So just like her first book, Strangers in Their Own Land, this new one is, I see it as such a gift to our country when it's as polarized as it is. So it comes at just the right time, and we are so honored to have Arlie here today to tell us all about it. Thank you, Arlie, for being here, and you can go ahead.
Thank you so much. So I realize that I'm talking to the RUBI community that already understands a lot of the story we're faced with. So I'll focus, if I can, on what I think I add to that from an emotions perspective. I guess I want to begin by saying that while we're all of us here are probably going through the 5 stages of grief, I think it's important for us to get that we're in a moment of double denial, as I see it. On the Democratic side of America, I think the denial has been that there are real reasons that the pot has boiled over, and there are structural reasons, in other words, that have to do with globalization and threat of immigration that have created a discontent that we're seeing has been utilized and formulated now. Has been appealed to by Donald Trump. So I guess the first thing is people on the left are denying who's there on the other side. They're saying, oh, they're settling for judgments. These are not smart people. These are prejudiced people. If we can only explain to them about racism and sexism and homophobia, then they will be enlightened. So that's a form of denial, actually, that if you're standing in the other guy's shoes, you might see the world more as he does. The second denial, of course, is among Trump voters who think, well, they've just voted for a new policy on immigration, really tighten up immigration, lift the economy for policies. But they're denying that we have just ushered in something that looks like fascism. And as you know, John Kelly, Trump's former chief of staff, said, Donald Trump, I'm a loyal Republican, he said, and have worked closely with Donald Trump. And having done that, I conclude that he fits the definition of a fascist. And then 13 other loyal Republicans who work closely with Donald Trump have said, Kelly is right. So I think the second half of America is denying that. So we're kind of in that place, and the work we need to do has to do with facing both denials and moving beyond them. So what I thought I could do today is take you with me on a voyage that took me to Kentucky Congressional District 5, that is the whitest and second poorest in the country. And I wanted to understand the rise of the right, which has led me to write a previous book, Strangers in Their Own Land. But I felt that there was an angle of vision, a perspective that I hadn't fully developed in that book that I have in this last book, Stolen Pride. And it has to do with emotion. And the purpose of the book is really to help us all become bilingual in the sense of tuning. We already speak rational talk, but we don't listen and understand and really hear the emotional messages, for there is a logic in emotion. That is the thesis of this book. It's told through a narrative, but that's the meat of it. And so the whole purpose, let me just digress one bit. I'm in the middle of The Anatomy of Fascism by Robert Paxton. And on page 66, he says, he's speaking, of course, of Germany. And he said, but the traditional parties stuck doggedly to the long, bookish speeches appropriate for the small, educated electorate. Are we doing that? Is that how we, on our side, are talking to the population in general? I think it is. So this is a book that'll tell us what to look for when we encounter people on the other side. So I wanted to understand the rise of the right in the US. And I had gone to the Deep South, like Charles, and now I happened to hear about a coal to coding project where coding jobs made available in Silicon Valley could go to unemployed coal miners in Eastern Kentucky and set up a silicon holler. And I had enough bad news that I had been looking at. This seemed like good news. So I went initially to this coding program in Kentucky, and a Democrat, Ro Khanna of California, had cooperated with Republican Hal Rogers of Paintsville to make it happen. So all of that looked good to me. And I went there, talked to students, especially ones living in the hollers of Eastern Kentucky, and they followed me into this book. But they also led me to become closely acquainted with Pike County. And This is, again, a congressional district. This, to you, you will be familiar with this. That of all 435 districts, is the whitest at 93%, and second poorest, as I mentioned. Less than 13% of people have BAs, and a quarter of those have less than high school. Although don't mistake that for a minute for an absence of acuity. And among the lowest labor force participant rates, 58% of working age, prime age men are actually not in the labor force. A lot of them are working and, they're just not paying taxes. But a lot of them aren't enjoying the fellowship of a workplace. A fellowship, I think, that they have found in their political party. So the reason I went there too is because of a political switch. These are people who voted 80% for FDR's New Deal, and then now 3 times in a row have voted for Donald Trump. So, and this has been a rapid shift for them in this region. So why? The question is why? Why isn't the Democratic Party, which I think those of us tuned in here probably agree, we should be the ones with the solutions to these problems and not some educated separate elite. So that became my purpose. And the first thing to say is that it's kind of a regional version of a national story. Just to go over it. In Kentucky 5, coal jobs have gone out, better coal in Wyoming, cheaper source of energy and natural gas. So coal jobs have gone out, and opiates have come in, especially to Kentucky and West Virginia, some of the least regulated states in the country. And there are many injured, as you know, coal miners who needed pain relief, and were told this pain relief was not addictive when it was. So that began what has cascaded. And when I came to Pikeville, I was looking around in 2017, there was a neo-Nazi led march of the extreme right that was asking for permission to go through town, offering terrible answers to real problems. So that became the perfect storm that I focus on in this book. I say it's a regional version of a national story, just to remind us of the national story. If we look at white, blue collar, 42% of American. Actually, in recent research, it wasn't there when I wrote this book. It's just come out by Reich, an economist at Harvard, who looked at over 3 decades the white blue collar, and by blue collar I mean without BAs. There's been a loss of income, loss of property, and with it, a social loss problem. More people living alone, more people in poor health, more family disruption, and more diseases of despair, as you know. So that's an absolute loss, economic and emotional, psychological. but it's also a relative loss, relative to whites with BAs living in cities. They're going up and, quote, we are going down. And relative to Blacks with or without BAs, Blacks starting much lower on the social scale, the direction was up. So you have this relative thing. It isn't like a whole country was experiencing the same thing. It was there were haves and have-nots of globalization. And if you were a blue-collar worker and there was offshoring, automation, you were getting hit in a way other sectors weren't. So we're talking envy in a way. And what I have lifted out to focus on is how that made people feel. And what we have in Eastern Kentucky are extremely proud people who are highly kind of old-fashioned in their cultural views of the individual, highly individualist. And so this led to what I came to call a pride paradox. They were proud people who had economically lost, but they were more prone than others to blame themselves because they felt, well, if I succeed, I go to work, I come home with a good paycheck. That's on me. It's my personal pride, personally earned pride. But if I get a pink slip and I haven't got a job now, mine closed, that's my fault. Not exactly my fault you didn't close the mine, but who else was there to blame? Did you see it coming? Did you have other alternatives? You didn't get educated for anything else. There's a kind of a self-blame. So you have it's a double whammy, or economic losses and then blaming. You're more prone to blame yourself, the individual. And what makes it a paradox is that in blue states, where there's more economic mobility, good economic news, there's less self-blame because there's a more circumstantial culture of blame. They take sociology classes in college that tell them, wait, your whole sector went down. Don't blame yourself, blame the sector and whoever's in charge of it. So what we're looking at is the interplay of economic news and cultural news, leading those in Eastern Kentucky that I was coming to know to have, in a way, the worst of both worlds, being victim of this pride paradox. And what I think has happened, if I were to lift out kind of the main message to you, it's that Donald Trump has introduced, in a way, a pride and shame presidency. I think he's a guy who knows about shame personally, a very harsh father, and came from Queens, not quite the big deal of Upper Manhattan. And that would be neither here nor there, except that I think it's given him an acuity into what we can call structural shame, that he has kind of spoken to it, proud again. And I think we have been, there's an elephant in the living room. The elephant is Donald Trump's anti-shaming ritual that he puts us through periodically and has since he first came to view. It's got 4 moments to it. Moment 1, Donald Trump says something transgressive. Haitian immigrants are eating the cats and dogs, pets of longtime residents. Okay, he'll just say that. Moment 2, the punditry shames Donald Trump. you can't say that. It's a lie. It's not true. You don't repeat an untruth. That turns it into a lie. Don't do that. That's bad. Moment 3, Donald Trump becomes the victim of the shamers. Look, they're shaming me. They're criticizing me. They're always criticizing me. Don't they do that to you, those shamers? Aren't they on your back too? Well, you and I will take the hit, that hit for you. And I'll carry the load of that shame. Moment 4, Donald Trump initiates the roar back. He turns shame to blame. Now, they may have done that themselves a little bit, but he really legitimates that. Let's blame who? Let's blame the punditry, the nefarious, treasonous press, the Democratic Party, the deep state, all the people that ever said anything critical of me, roar back. And I think that the Democratic half of America has been listening to moment 1 and 2, that is transgressive statement and the punditry shaming, and that the Republican side of America has been listening to moment 3 and 4, that is the victimhood. This hurts me. I am a victim. And for you, I'm channeling your victimhood. And for the roar back, I am getting revenge for that victimhood. So I guess the purpose of my book is to make us bilingual so we can hear these emotional narratives when they are played out. And we will not be like the people Robert Paxton is describing the anatomy of fascism and talking simply to ourselves. So I think we operate this is an invitation. When you do a piece of ethnographic work, you create a conceptual space. And my invitation for us to think out is, do we have not just a material economy, but a pride economy? And that a lot of the competition and the conflict goes on there. I introduce a number of kinds of pride, and I think Donald Trump, and argue this in the book, has moved from national pride to bad boy pride, to outlaw pride, and has embraced basically the very far right. There's a paradox, a spoiler for those of you who haven't read the books. I trace a march, a right-wing march led by a neo-Nazi, Matthew Heimbach. And he's saying, hey, this is for whites, so we built this country. We need to get rid of everybody else. And we don't need democracy either. So he comes and he goes, and this community, this hard-bitten community, says, no, our grandfathers fought against Hitler, and they're buried in our beautiful mountains here in these cemeteries. No, we don't want anything to do with fascism. But then another parade comes, which I also talk about, organized by Eastern Kentucky patriots, and another leader is introduced. Of course, that's Donald Trump. And they say no to fascism in the back door. It comes in the back door. But they say yes to it when it comes in the front door. And they have been primed to that acceptance, I think, through this accumulated shame there. And I think left-wing critics make it worse by saying, oh, you stupid hillbilly. And without an answer from either party in the material sense, and only an answer from the Republican Party, the Trump Party, in the emotional sense, the left had clearly lost. People said to me about Biden, oh, he has a visibility problem. And when at the pump, the prices of gas were going up, there were posters or little stickets on next to the price pointing to a picture of Biden. He's causing that rising price. We're not looking, of course, at the rising profits of the gas stations at this point, too. So, to sum up, this is a local story of one congressional district, and it offers, I think, an exaggerated version of a national story of loss and the exploitation of the shame that results from that loss. So we are left with the new president. And I guess before we open it out, I want to say that I think what's been missing is that there's been an absence of cultural embrace of the whole idea of social class. And I want to just end with one quote from a guy who did not like Trump, but really doesn't like the Democratic Party either. And I think he's the kind of guy we need to go out and meet. He's rural, he's poor, he's high school educated, and he would be very interested in RUBI. He'd be extremely interested. But we need to go out, meet him, and have some reach out from the Democratic Party to such people. But here's what he says. We think in narratives. Well, that's not a person, he didn't go to school with and learn the word narrative, but this is how he thinks. We've got, and I should say, born in a trailer, dirt poor. When I first met him, he said, I'm trailer trash, okay? And high school educated, was told he had a learning disability. He doesn't work now. He has a physical ailment. Wife supports them both. They're on food stamps now because she just lost her job. Anyway, this is his background. So he said, we've got two main narratives. One's for, and people like me don't fit either one. First, you've got a white middle-class narrative. You hear these success stories. A person comes from nothing and gets to something. So you say, congratulations, you're smart, hardworking, really something, proud. But you look at the guy who says he came from nothing and you see something he had to start with. He's got a story of going from something to being something better. And that's the normal narrative for whites. Then you've got a second narrative for blacks, and people say, oh, you're black, that means you're poor. You don't have something to begin with, and you don't have something now, so that's because you're a victim of racism. But that leaves a problem for people like me. If I'm a Moore's Trailer Park white trash person, the only narrative I have tells me that I'm white, so I'm privileged, and that's something I have, and that must put me ahead. But what if it doesn't put me ahead? I'm not left with nothing because of racism. I'm left with nothing because I'm lazy and stupid, and there's no excuse. And if you're white and poor, people think, what's wrong with you that you're stuck at the bottom? We need to talk. to guys like that, because I think there are a lot of them. And we need to talk to them and hear them in the language of emotion. So let me stop there and we can open it out. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Arlie. Folks, I see a bunch of people are already starting to put questions in the chat, and that's great. And you can raise your hand as well. Let me just kick off with one thing just to clarify, because you talked about how a lot of the folks that you talked to in Kentucky had a real tendency to blame themselves. They had this internalized shame around their poverty or their downward mobility. And then you talked about Trump's de-shaming ritual. So what that left me wondering is, for people who experienced that de-shaming ritual, at the end of it is the end game that they have like a temporary or long-term reprieve from that shame that they were feeling? Like, does it just feel so good when he like redirects that blame against other people? And at what point does the shame then come charging back in?
Wonderful question. I think that these rallies, are all of which I think carry us through those 4 moments, pretty much leave people elated. So they feel elated. And then, as you say, the elation doesn't last. I think it's temporary. It's a little bit like a drug. It's a little bit, you get high from it. And I've been to these rallies and wrote about one in Strangers. Hey, look how many of us there are. Hey, this is cool. Hey, I'm part of something. There's an elation. And these are people whose communities are much diminished. And so they're coming together with people. There's an elation. And then I think you're right, it goes away and you're looking for another hit. That's what I think. I'm not sure. We need to look further into it, but that's my.
Yeah. Okay, let's see. There's a question here from Skip. Okay, on this issue of Democrats leaned pretty heavily into threats to democracy, and yeah, like talking about January 6th and really trying to like instill this fear of fascism and authoritarianism. Based on the people that you talked to, do you think do you think that was, and going forward, would it be an effective message to keep talking to people about that and keep trying to like instill that fear, or is that kind of missing the boat with rural people?
Wonderful question, basic question. First, about denial. The main thing about it is when we're denying something, we don't know we're denying that thing. It's the kind of nature of denial that you're denying that you're denying. And so I think first of all, let me just say that the character of the denial that I ran into was to acknowledge something and then disregard it. So people would say, oh yeah, January 6th. But you remember that scaffolding where they had a noose and were saying, hang Mike Pence, hang Mike Pence. Well, look out the window there, and it was a little bus station booth. It was only that large. So what is that? That's not denying that a crowd was calling for the death of the vice president who was doing his job by the Constitution. It's not denying it. It's noticing it and then dismissing it as a piece of evidence to build a large thing. So that's the character of the denial. They'll say, oh yeah, there was January 6th and yeah, there was violence, but it's boys being boys. Anyway, there'll be dismissal of the details that build a picture. And no, I think just if to answer the question now, is it okay to just say, hey, look at the evidence? No, it's not okay. It's okay, but it's ineffective. I think what we first have to do to be effective is say, I see the reality that you take to be the most important. I get it. I'm looking at you. We're not going to agree, but I get how you see it. I'm shaking my head that I get it. And once you have a relationship with a person, and negotiators know how to do this, and therapists know how to do this, I think the whole left needs, it's not hard. It's not hard. There's no, secret magic to this. Once you get that kind of, you get a message back, oh, okay, so you really do see me. You really do get, okay. All right. Now tell me what you want to tell me that I'm not seeing. So it has to be like that. And you have to basically say to the person, I'm no better than you. I mean, when I go out to interview people say, oh, Berkeley, professor, blah, blah. And I'll say, well, my grandma grew up on a dairy farm in Maine, that. I remember she had a thick accent. They'll say, oh, we're ridiculed for our accents. I said, my dad used to call me Arlie. That's a New England, he was born in Boston, Arlie. So I call myself Arlie, but so I know about regional accents, so you do that. Find some way that you make clear, okay, we're two of us sitting down and I respect you. Once you do that, I think it's a little barrier, either in a group and in lots of groups, or one by one, then you have the conversation about denial. And you say, look, I think my side's been denying stuff too. But what I'm really scared about, may I tell you, would you be interested in knowing, is kind of what Kelly said. He knows Trump close up. I would approach it like that, but not like Paxton is describing the left in Hitler's time as kind of talking from
That's going to trigger a lot of defensiveness for anyone even remotely considering voting for Trump. Yeah.
Erica, I think we've got some raised hands, although I'm not seeing the whole gallery view, so I don't know who, but I also know that, oh, now I see it. Why don't we go to a couple of the raised hands and then go back? There's several questions in the chat that are overlapping and I can speak to some of them.
Great. Thanks, Anthony. Yeah, I see Phil and Barbara. So why don't we take you guys? Go ahead, Phil.
Okay, thank you. I'm a member of Braver Angels in Washington State, and have started a project of bridging the rural-urban divide. And it's an ongoing thing. But what I wanted to bring up is that one of the problems with there's so many problems that Democrats have. But if I were advising Biden right after he won the election, I'd say to him, listen to what Bernie Sanders has to say. It's my notion that Joe Rogan back then liked what Bernie Sanders was saying.
Right.
So in terms of what to do, I think we need to have a dialogue and understand things that Bernie has been saying. One thing, he pauses after you ask him a question and he always gives a logical answer. So I think that's one. By the way, my project started at the Spokane Ag Show this past February. We had a September 24th where we brought the farmers on to talk about issues and bringing product to market, and we're revisiting it next February on going back out there. Now we can ask them the questions. Okay, your guy's in there, what do you think we should do? I'll leave it there.
Yeah, that's great, Phil. And it fits with what I've been impressed with. People love Bernie, Trumpers who love Bernie. That's he's a guy who understands what larger forces are at play here. So, and even the man I just quoted, he was a Bernie person. Yeah. Didn't vote for anyone this time, but he's a Bernie person. Thank you.
And on that note, and then I'm going to go to you, Barbara, because so many people have, been talking so much about Bernie, and the debate rages, would Bernie have won? So is your sense that people you talked to were supportive of Bernie because of what he stood for substantively, and or because of more his relatability and his style and the way he spoke to people?
I think he seemed the only guy out there that was giving a focus to social class. And that seemed missing from their picture of the Democratic Party, that it was preoccupied with transgender bathrooms and women's rights, gay rights, racial rights. And of course, those are concerns, but there was no pointing to, say, the Reverend Barber, whose recent book on white poverty. Here he is, the heir apparent to Martin Luther King, has written a book on white poverty. Why have we lost that chord? I think Bernie represents that chord, and whether they like the way he spoke or not, I think they did. Seemed plain spoken. They'll go for that. They don't want slick. But substance of what he said appealed to them.
Yeah. Okay, Barbara, thanks
Yes.
for waiting. Go ahead.
Hello, Arlie. I live up in Ithaca, New York, near Cornell. And when you came to speak a few years ago at Cornell, there I was, I have to say, I enjoyed it very much. My question to you is, if the commercial media, the corporate media, can do anything to change how people are feeling about themselves, to change the situation, if they'd only speak the facts. And I'll leave it here and let you speak.
The corporate, are you speaking of media or corporations?
No, the media that's owned by corporations.
Oh,
Is what I'm
okay.
speaking, the commercial media.
Yeah. We have one elephant in the room, and now we have another elephant. Yeah, it's very distortive. We need to, what do we need? We need other media channels. And just to back up this a little bit, apart from the media, but it's reminding me that we used to have labor unions in the picture that were the middleman between the working class and the Democratic Party. Is down to 9% now who are unionized labor in the private sector. So it's not doing what it did, and we don't have a substitute for it. So the media has kind of entered into a vacuum. You could say that has left. And so we've got two problems. First, we need to resuscitate the unions or create some functional equivalent. And we need new media channels, challenge the old ones.
Thank you very much.
Anthony, do you want to go to a couple from chat?
Yeah, I'm trying. There's so many comments and questions in the chat. There are different themes, but there's two common themes kind of around engagement. Some of them are coming from people who born and raised or long time rural, and some are coming from people who are not rural or recent transplants. And so one set of the questions is about your notion of being bilingual, being able to speak in a way other than progressive, liberal, urban kind of talk. One person said it isn't even just bilingual, it's multilingual. But being conversant in other ways of talking, and people are sort of asking, what does that look like? How do we do that? And you started to answer that. I'll just say that RUBI works a lot on helping people understand how to do that too. So that's the language part of it. The other question is more broadly about engagement. Again, often coming from kind of rural, sympathetic, urban folks. And a couple people in the chat have suggested that maybe one of the most effective ways of engagement is not so much talk, but action, like collaborative, concrete community action, which of course what RUBI does through Community Works, but other folks are doing too. So maybe it's two questions. Tell us more about that bilingual, multilingual approach, and then what do you think of an engagement strategy that's more about action than talk, collaboratively with your conservative neighbors?
I love that idea of action together with talk, doing something while you're talking while you're doing something like Habitat for Humanity, for example. We've got this homeless problem. It's a rural version of this homeless problem too, I discovered in Pikeville. Interviewed the guy that went around. He said, oh, we've got homeless, but they're living in cars or rusted trailers, or, so they're like hidden, a few under bridges, attics. How about, a habitat kind of thing? And what strikes me is that there are kind of a whole bunch of issues, but I would say three come to mind where Trump is far more radical than most Republicans. And one of them is climate change and majority and the environment in general. So Donald Trump is saying, let's get rid of the EPA, let's deregulate industry, drill, baby, drill. And actually, I've just been looking at data on this and not finding it. I had it, but just from memory. If you ask, this is a 2024, I think, November survey that asked people, do you believe that the government should spend money in doing things to reduce the effect of climate change? A huge majority of Democrats and a bare majority of all Republicans said, yes, we should spend money, government money, in doing that. Do you believe that children should be taught about climate change in school? A huge majority of Democrats and a bare majority of Republicans say, yes, kids should learn about this in school. Meanwhile, Donald Trump is saying climate change is a hoax. Okay, so what we have is a majority of moderate Republicans agreeing also. The more specific, I wish I had this right in front of me. Hang on. Because it's amazing. Okay, here we are. Actually, let me it'll give you hope. And this is not the only one. I think we could also do a crossover on reproductive rights. And I think we could do majorities in both parties on that, put a certain way. And also on prison reform, because a lot of whites are going into prison now with regard to, drugs. But going back to this finding, November 2024, 76% of Trump voters and 86% of all voters oppose attempts to weaken EPA, much less get rid of it, just don't want to weaken it. Okay.
It's hard to follow.
Really
They
is.
don't put climate as a top priority issue, low priority, but they are for doing something about it. Provide federal funding to help farmers improve farming practices to protect and restore the soil so it absorbs and stores more carbon. Okay, Democrats, 96% support. Republicans, 74% support. Okay. Provide tax rebates for people who purchase energy efficient vehicles or solar panels. Democrats, 93% support. Republicans, 57% support. Provide tax credits or rebates to encourage people to buy electric appliances such as heat pumps and induction stoves that run on electricity instead of oil or gas. Democrats, again, 93% support. Republicans, 52%. That seems to me a huge opportunity there of crossover. So whether you're doing something together or you're just having coffee or beers across the table, there are these issues that we agree on. But the more actual things we can do, remediation, kind of cleanup efforts, picking up garbage that's thrown off I think that would be terrific. I mean, how about that? Pick up all those cups, plastic cups, and recycling thing. Anyway, so I don't mean to be Pollyanna, but I do, I guess, feel myself and share with you, we can't be bystanders, and we can't be, there is hope. I think that's actually founded on something.
Thanks, Arlie. Yeah. Why don't we go to Sherry? But before, Sherry, you can come off mute, but just two things to note. One is that a number of people have talked about being urban or suburban folks who feel solidarity with rural, but they don't quite know how to, how to pull that off in a constructive way that's not condescending, et cetera. Beth Ruck has put her email in the chat and would love for people to email her. Beth is a longtime friend and ally of RUBI, but she lives in Brooklyn. So Beth would love folks to email her if they want to talk about this a little more. How can rural and suburban people be meaningful and productive allies? Also, in the language conversation, somebody else had a very good suggestion. They noted that they grew up on a farm in the Midwest, moved to Detroit as an adult, but when they moved there, they were greeted as though they weren't intelligent because they grew up on a farm and maybe the way they talk. So their suggestion was, if you're going to engage with working folks in the countryside, start by listening more than talking. And that's one of RUBI's prime directives. Start with listening, shut up, listen first. So somebody said exactly that in the chat. So now we can go on to our question.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes,
Yep.
Sherry.
Great, thanks. So I'm here in central Pennsylvania, and I would say like a lot of the really heavy Trump folks around us are middle class, many with 2 to 4 years of college under their belts. They send their kids to college. They are active in their evangelical churches. They kind of run the show. They, you know, the school boards and the township supervisors and the county commissioners. So I guess I was wondering, I don't get the vibe from them that they're feeling that they connect to this cycle of shame. I also think, you know, they're middle-class folks and they, you know, they take their vacations, and I don't think the Bernie stuff would be particularly appealing to them. Most of the employment in our county is healthcare sector and, you know, teachers, prison. So I guess I'm kind of curious about exactly what kind of rural folks. It seems like there's a gloss on what counts as rural people. And I just wonder if you could speak to that.
Sure, I think there are many, of course, sources of support for Donald Trump. There are the tax Trump people, right? Who just don't want to pay taxes for services they didn't have in mind to offer. And there are, so maybe some of these middle class Trump supporters you're talking about are them. There are the pro-life Trumpers, you know, who have been, excuse me, just 1 minute. I think looking at the 45% of women that voted for Trump, I've been a lot of people who are not for reproductive choice. And there are those who are, you know, they may not be low income and they may not have experienced a more important thing to me is loss. Not just do you have a good job or not, but have you lost ground from where you were, or have you lost ground from where your father was? That there are people, and I would wager a guess that even among the middle class, there is a loss story that he's appealing to, and fear of it. Because in addition to the 1, 2, 3, 4 anti-shaming ritual, there is a fear the world is going to hell in a handbasket. Things will get worse and worse and worse, and only I can rescue you. That's a kind of a fear cycle, which again, if you're bilingual or multilingual, you're listening. Okay, he's stoking fear. Okay, what prior fear? This is the paradigm. Whatever he's stoking, you step back and think, why is this stoking working? What in that person's life made them afraid? Maybe there was something real to be afraid of in their life, not yours, but theirs. I think that's the pathway I'm inviting people to think through. And it may be in these apparently affluent, you know, 2-car garage people. Maybe their parents had a 3-car garage. You know, what is their story? I guess and is it connected to loss and shame and stolen, that little paradigm?
Thanks, Arlie. And I'll just add from Ruby's perspective that when we talk about empathy and reaching out, listening more before we talk, shifting our language, shifting our policy priorities, we are talking about a relatively small group of people who are persuadable. So, you know, it's not that everybody who voted for Trump are people that we should, you know, do everything in our power to empathize with. It's a subset of people. And the folks Arlie spoke to and got to know in both Louisiana and Kentucky, as I understand it, are very much in that subset of people who are otherwise potentially reachable, potentially allies. So yeah, there's plenty of folks who love Trump because he's a piece of crap who's going to make their lives a little better. Ruby doesn't care about those folks. We're trying to reach this smaller group. Okay, cool. So let's go on. We've got another, looks like Mark has come in and there's a few more in the chat as well. But Mark, why don't you go ahead?
I just wanted to take off a little bit from what Arlie was just talking about. I live in a rural county in Ohio. I just finished running for the second time for a House seat, soundly defeated both times. And the first time I ran, the first event I went to was a Farm Bureau Meet the Candidate event. And, you know, one of the things that, one of the first questions was, what do I think about rails to trails? Who could be opposed to rails to trails, right? Farmers are very opposed to that. In fact, we had people encouraging opposition to county park system because of that, because they feel such ownership because they've tended to those areas, they use them to get to their fields, and they just feel like it's an infringement for those organizations to come in and take that property from them that really isn't theirs and utilize it for this purpose and interfere with what they want to do. And so I think that's just kind of a small example of that distinction you can have even within a rural county. I live in the largest city, the county seat, with a small liberal arts college. So majority of the population lives outside those main cities. So that's, I think, an example of that type of situation.
Interesting.
Very
I
good.
wonder, are they threatened by environmentalists? Does that feel like an alien, paradoxically urban driven movement to them, Mark?
No, they've taken care of that area. I mean, it's almost as though they've incorporated it into their property. And so they feel ownership of it. And then it's going to cross the crossings they use to get to their fields. And they claim that those people are going to litter and, you know, it's going to be dirty. And actually it's to the contrary, typically, but just they feel an ownership of that because they've taken care of it and it's almost part of their property.
Well, Anthony, if there's maybe one more question, and then we should probably come to a close.
Yeah. Well, actually, there's one more in the chat. Bert Lauderdale, an eminent Kentuckian himself. So not in the chat, but with a raised hand. But before we get to Bert, and Bert, you'll be the last questioner. Again, trying to put several questions together. There's been a lot of folks talking about the question of class and where does that fit into both the language and how we talk about things, but also have we on the left lost, many of us, the focus on class or the language of classes? Is that part of the problem we face? And if it is, how do we get that? What do we need to do to get that back?
Right.
So that's a question there. So for you, Arlie, and Erica, did you want to
I just want to add one more dimension to that question, because I noticed, Arlie, a few times you use the term social class, whereas usually I hear people just talk about class. And so I know that you must mean something by that when you specifically say social class, and I wonder what it is.
Yes. I do mean more by the term social class than is meant by the term economic class. I guess I'm always trying to add the social story to the economic story, and to the social story, the emotional story. So it's not subtracting, but adding. Yeah, I think there's a giant paradox. Paradox is my favorite word these days. The Democrats used to be the party of social class. That's, you know, we're for the poor worker. And that's being put upon by the boss man, you know, and small farmers added in that And that we've dropped that rhetorically. I think Biden's done a lot with social class in mind. And in fact, he's shoved a lot of money, something like 70 or 80% of the resources that come from the reduction, Inflation Reduction Act, go to red states because they're the poorer states. Well, now we're talking economy, that helps people deal with issues of economic class. But here's, without, I guess, saying more, Erica, in answer to your excellent question, I want to say something else, that Maine, which is the state that my grandma grew up in on a small dairy farm, is purple state, but rural areas are definitely Trump red. And what's happened there is that the middle-sized farms have gone out. The little farms went out early. Middle-sized are going out now, and the large ones are diversifying. But what's hurting them are mega industrial farms with dairy farms with, 5,000 cows that never get out of the barn in Southern California. In other words, it's other larger industrialized interests that are hurting the little farmer, but that story is suppressed. In other words, that's a story of capitalism, and that's a story of the class inequities that are resulting from the big guys unregulated taking over from the little. And Robert Reich has written a book called Saving Capitalism, how big stores like Amazon, Walmart have eaten up the little guys' stores. So in a way, when you put social class back in the picture, you have to actually put capitalism back in the picture. That system, is it regulated? Is it not? Who are the regulators? Look at all the foxes being put to regulate the hen houses right now. So I'm just adding that, but I add the word social because that part of the story often gets lost. And I just referenced the story I told of social mobility when people were going down. Look at all those social and emotional losses that went with it. We think of divorce as something on its own, right? It's personal, how well you get along with your partner or don't. Actually, no, the whole rate goes along with social class. These personal things are ultimately very social, I think.
Thanks, Arlie.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay,
Thank you.
Bert, we're gonna have you bring it home with the last question. Just remind everybody that we will again be doing a monthly briefing. Are we skipping January, Erica?
We're skipping January.
Okay.
We'll be back in February. And I also just want to mention before people have to start hopping off that we have coming up on December 18th, our monthly Introduction to Community Works program that we've mentioned that a few times today. If you're not familiar with it, it's where RUBI supports and works with local Democratic parties at the county level in rural areas to do kind of good neighbor to neighbor direct works in the community as an alternative to political work. And if you want to learn more about that and potentially get your Democratic Party involved in your county, Meredith has dropped the link in the chat. It's pretty buried deep now, Meredith. So if you want to drop that again in the chat, there's a link where you can register for our next session.
That's great, thanks. Bert.
Thanks, Anthony. Appreciate the opportunity to ask questions. Sorry to jump on right at the end. It just took me that long to remember how to use Zoom. So, Arlie, much appreciation for this book. I really enjoyed it. I think it's a really important contribution and conversation extender. And so appreciate that. I had the opportunity to talk with you when you were here doing interviews. And so I was looking forward to this and have enjoyed the read. And also much appreciation to RUBI for putting this on. I will further complicate extending this by squeezing in 2 questions for the last question. One is just, you referenced a couple times, I think, a very helpful notion about the story that the Reich tells. And I think you introduced that early, but then later in the book, you talk about this story of standing in line and line breakers, et cetera. But you also mentioned in there that you've come to believe there's a story that the right tells and there's another story that the left tells. And so my first question is there a similar sort of pretty direct description of what that story the left tells is? And I'll squeeze in my second question, which is just, I wondered as I read this now, I kind of understand the timelines, but I wondered if you have thoughts or have had conversations in the last few months, even as the book has been in the pipeline and then released, about the effect that adding J.D. Vance to the ticket this summer had in terms of like animating or complicating this story and the sort of devotion to Trump in Eastern Kentucky, given J.D.'s background. I'll leave that background.
Yeah.
So both
Right.
questions, if possible.
Okay. Sure. The left deep story, I think, as what is a deep story? Again, it's how you feel about life. It's not your precepts. It's not your beliefs and policy positions. It's how things feel. Begins not with a long line that's competitive. It begins with a circle. And what's the circle around? It's a circle around a public creation, publicly available, publicly built, a state-of-the-art children's science museum. And everybody in a circle, like around it, feels like their tax dollars go for building this thing. First, it's great, looks beautiful, kids get smarter going to it. It's available to rich and poor, and people on the left like that idea. They don't begrudge the tax dollars that go to it. Some of them actually have built that. That is, they are public sector workers and feel this devotion, if you will. And so both as users of public goods and as contributors to it, the left sort of feels in. And in the narrative for that fits the left side's deep story, there is a moment which outside the circle comes a giant excavator that gouges out a foundation of that state-of-the-art children's science museum, publicly built and available, and takes that foundation, wrecks it, and uses that concrete far outside the circle to build a McMansion for the 1%. And the left think, damn, that is bad. That is not right. You know, all these little children, poor families, multicultural families, and it's hogging, it's unfair. So I think that captures a piece of the left-wing deep story. As for Vance, they don't like him. I talked to the most ardent Trump fan in the book. You'll know who that is. And he said, oh, no, Vance is seen as a drag on the ticket. So paradoxically, they don't think he's an addition. And they feel like they're the stayers and Vance was the lever, and he's dissing those stairs that, you know, didn't get on Route 23 up like he did. And they feel that. They feel shamed by one of their own.
Thank you.
Okay, well, we're gonna have to bring it to a close. Thank you so much, Arlie, for everything you've shared with us in all your books and your talk. And thanks everyone for an exceptionally lively and insightful chat. Some people have asked if they could get hold of the chat later. We can make that available. Lots of good stuff in there. So thanks everyone. We're taking a break January. Hope to see y'all back here in February. Have a good holiday.
And thanks to RUBI for all you do. Fabulous, fabulous.
Thanks, Arlie, and thanks to you.
Thanks, Arlie. Bye-bye now.